I am going to refer to my notes just so that I can absolutely stay on task. Couple of things real quick before we jump into, images of fishing and that kind of thing. A couple of things I want to mention. I'll be semi-unapologetic in saying, yes, we do want to get you on a trip to Cuba with Reds. That's our goal. Included or information that I neglected to include at the beginning of the discussion last week when we were talking Ascension Bay was that we have a saltwater rendezvous January 13th. If you are on one of our hosted trips, you want to learn how to become a better and more efficient and stronger saltwater angler when it comes to decision making and casting and just overall knowledge. We want to get you there on January 13th in our in-person seminar at Canyon River Lodge at Reds. It's worth traveling for. We spend the whole day with you talking strategy. We will do very specific pre-trip Zoom seminars that are more dialed like for your group and for your dates. Each group that's going will get together on Zoom and we'll pre-funk and prep that way. So we won't get in like precise nitty-gritty of like tight travel logistics. The great thing about our hosted trips is, we're invested in the trip right alongside you. And you're gonna be able to communicate directly with Reds, not some go between when you have questions about prepping for your trip and etc. The other thing about our hosted groups is we eliminate any issues of like, if there's a short straw, if there's a problem with one of the guide boats, or there's a guide that's sick, or logistical challenges take place, we make sure and share those burdens equally among the anglers. If you're concerned about getting access to the more talented guides, or the guides being rotated, or a guide that maybe you didn't jive with, the host is there to rotate those guides through and make sure that everybody's getting an opportunity at any special opportunities that might pop up, or specific guides, or fisheries or species and things like that. So the host is there to help rotate that and be a spokesperson for everyone in the group. Even if you're less experienced, it's a really great resource to be able to have. Okay, so we have several different trips going, and I'm going to put links into the chat right now, and you can even jump over there and you can cheat a little bit if you want to look at that. The first one I'm going to put in there has all of our hosted trip dates. So you can look at that on my screen as well here in just a moment, and I will bring that up. And just so that we're talking about the same thing, just confirm with me, Bob, Steve, Dallas, give me a thumbs up if our screen share is clear.
All good.
Okay, so here are all of our listed dates. 3 of the weeks or 4 of the weeks are full already. We have trips going to 2 different destinations, primarily Cuba, Zapata. But if you're looking for specifics on dates, they're going to be listed on the link that I just put into the chat. Okay. Pricing is also on here as well, along with some really good trip background stuff. If you've got a friend that you want to invite that maybe isn't going to watch the entire recording, but you just want to hit him or her with an invite, just send this link to them, and it has a lot of kind of the boiled down information. We find it to be just really kind of short and to the point. It's just a single web page dedicated to that. So that's the first thing, and that you can get on the dates right there. So that's one of the first resources that I want to give you. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into just a map of the area, and I'll probably jump into a slideshow and then bounce back and forth. But when we talk about Cuba, we're talking about this entire country. Steve, did you have something that you wanted to add there?
No, we're good.
Okay. We're talking about the entire country. There's numerous fishing destinations within Cuba. And I want to jump over and I want to share with you kind of a map and show you kind of geographically where, just exactly where these destinations are. So this is a map. This is the travel group, or where we file our OFAC permitting to have completely legal and sanctioned travel and documented travel into Cuba's Blue Sanctuary. So these are the different destinations that would be offered by, say, the Avalon group, which
Oh boy, oh boy.
is, let me go ahead and look at that. Let's go ahead and have everybody just mute their mics. Would probably be best for the seminar here. So there's lots of different places that you can go fish within Cuba. The fisheries that we have, I wouldn't say expertise in, but experience in, is going to be the Zapata Preserve right here. And that's going to launch out of the Bay of Pigs, which is right here. And the Zapata Marine Preserve is an enormous sanctuary that's permitted, and there's only 8 anglers per week that are going to be within our sanctioned region fishing within the Zapata. The other one is going to be the Canareros trip, which is a really kind of unique hybrid destination. It's a liveaboard. There's also a land-based operation that operates, part of the time at a Cayo Largo here, where you can see my mouse. But that's a hybrid. You actually have a 120-mile expanse that you can move between the Island of the Youth here and Cayo Largo through here, and then your boat can move throughout the destination to get the best of the series of fisheries, depending on tides, conditions, and the guide's instincts. The Zapata Marine Preserve is called the Zapata. For those that you have a little bit of Spanish background, that's shaped like a shoe right there. So that's the Zapata. And then this is a little bit closer look at the Zapata Preserve that's set aside just for our fishing groups when they're there. So I don't have the exact scale of this, but it's absolutely enormous. It's absolutely enormous. So this is the boundary right here, and I don't believe we've ever hardly pressed the boundaries. The liveaboard is going to originate in the Bay of Pigs, approximately back in here, and it takes several hours to motor out all the way around into this harbor here. And depending on the tides, currents, and winds, the captain's going to find moorage here throughout the entire. And then we will span out from the liveaboard into all the different keys and flats that are within there. Okay. So both operations that we book and host trips on are going to be on a liveaboard. And there's a variety of different boats that might appear. I believe that one's called the Aggressor. That's a very large boat, but we've been on the Aggressor. We've been on the Avalon 1, Avalon 2, and one called the Georgiana in the Zapata. So we're never exactly sure which boat it's going to be, but they're all well equipped and very well organized. And just like you're seeing here, we have dolphin skiffs that pull up to the back of the boat in the morning and the evening, either picking up anglers or dropping them off. One thing that's really, there's a lot of things that are really great about the liveaboard trips. If you've done one, you could totally relate, but logistically, it's just so simple. When I'm in the first cabin on the Georgiana boat in the Zapata, in 6 giant steps, I can be from my bunk or my cabin all the way into my fishing skiff. So it's just so simple. You don't have to worry about hiking downstairs, hiking upstairs. When's my ride leaving? All that kind of stuff. Nobody's leaving without you. You're sleeping right there where you're getting picked up. The other thing that is always a common question, frequently asked question, is what about seasickness? I haven't seen that be an issue in any of the groups I've ever been a part of. Is anybody getting motion sickness? The boats are moored in a very stable position. There isn't really any significant swelling or rocking or anything like that. I have not that.
No.
Let me go ahead and mute that person. If you have questions, just chat them in. This seasickness has not really been an issue, and Steve can, if Steve's able to and in a position to talk, Steve can speak to that if he'd like. He's been to Cuba a couple more times than I have.
Yeah, we have had a couple guys that they know that they get motion sick, and then they do take some Dramamine on the departure before the big departure, because we motor on the Zapata trip. We motor about 3.5 hours to get to the fishing destination where we moor. And on that Canareros trip, it's about 3 hours across the open water. And so if you're prone to that, take it that day, be ready for an early morning departure on day 1, and do whatever you need to do the night before to get ready for that. Once we get moored, we haven't had any issues with that at all. We're on little flats boats and fishing water where you can see the bottom near the shore most of the time.
Yeah, so typically, I think Steve summarized it. It's kind of during the runs, right, Steve, when the boat's actually under power and heading out to moorage.
That's right. Yep. The departure day and the big trip back to port. Yep. That's it.
Yeah, so just to put anybody at ease, that's a couple hour, I think 4 hours on a slow day, depending on the wind. But actually, once you're anchored up, it's not. I've not seen it be an issue. Okay, let's talk just real quickly about just overall logistics and just knock that out. You're going to arrive in Havana the day before your trip, which is really wise with these live aboard trips. We've never had anybody miss it, but boy, it'd be logistically challenging if you missed that boat and it was leaving. So you'll arrive in Havana the day before. For instance, on my group, my first listed trip date is April 20th. I'm flying into Havana April 19th. We'll stay at a nice little hostel on the night of April 19th. And then on April 20th, we'll transfer to the yacht. And then we'll sleep in port that night. And then early in the morning afternoon of the 20th, we will head out to moorage. We've done it a couple of different ways, but at this time, we're going to leave early in the morning on this one. So
To clarify,
in the afternoon on this one.
to clarify, Joe, you said a hostel for the overnight. It's an Airbnb. It's not a hostel, guys.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I've been in some shady hostels in South America. This is not a hostel.
I was in a shady hostel in Cuba the first time I went, but that'll be a story I'll share with my group. Yeah, very nice place to stay, extremely well organized. And the nice thing is you get a whole afternoon and evening in Havana, and then you get another morning in Havana before we transfer. So you do get an opportunity on our itineraries to see Havana. Now, I'm going to put an email address, or maybe Steve can put the email address. If you would put John Kovich's email address in the chat, Steve, that would be really helpful. A lot of people ask about trip extensions. Can I go early? Can I stay late to spend a little extra time? Our travel documentation is pretty airtight and locked down. So we yield all those logistics to John Kovich, who handles our formal documentation for the trip, just to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. Steve and I have managed all that before, but in order to ensure it's done absolutely right and above board, we have passed that off to an expert. His name is John Kovich, and he helps us manage all of the Cuba travel arrangements. So if your trip of going on one of our trips is pivotal on whether you can do a little extension or get there early, you can email John, tell him you're working with us, and just investigate what the most logistically simple plan is to accommodate you. So that's the basic flight logistics. And then on the last afternoon of the trip, the way Steve and I run ours, we're jumping off the boat in the morning and heading to the airport for an afternoon flight back into the U.S. Pretty straightforward. American Airlines is who I've used, but there are other airlines I've flown in and out on Southwest. So there are other airlines servicing Cuba, but American Airlines seems to run the most consistent schedule with multiple planes a day going in and out of Havana. Okay, travel logistics covered. I think that probably covers one of the questions that was shot out there. It looks like John Kovich's email address is in the chat, and we are recording. Okay, let's jump back to some photos, and we're just going to start running through images. Now, my goal isn't to just simply wow you with images today. I want to make sure that we're just covering kind of important trip stuff, because there's so many great fishing images and videos and stuff like that regarding fly fishing in Cuba. I mean, it really is the greatest destination on earth for fishing the Grand Slam species. Because of its exclusivity and the live aboard arrangement, it's just a little bit more expensive. I'd say that's the only downside of Cuba. But every evening you're rolling back into that boat, you know that there's good food waiting. And to me, I think one of the greatest things about, the live aboard is just the simplicity of jumping back on that boat, just having some mojitos in the evening, and then every morning and every evening, that photo is blown up a little bit, but you literally get to see that sun melt into the horizon every night, and then you get to see it boil up out of the ocean every morning. And to me, that on the live aboard when you're on a land-based operation and you're sleeping in your room and there's power lines or buildings or trees and things like that, those sunrises and sunsets are just spectacular. And it's just such a simple itinerary every day. You can really unplug, you can really relax. And the other thing about the live aboard as well is you're not going to have any communication. There is no cell phone, there's no Instagram, there's no email, there's nothing. You're totally off grid. And I do have it in my notes here, but you can't bring a satellite phone, satellite messenger. There's no communicating back home. And if we have an emergency, we have a relay system that we can communicate if you need to communicate back home, either with your doctor or a health crisis. But it is a little bit, there is a bit of a relay and delay there. But just getting unplugged to someplace or something that's really special about this trip. The guides run dolphin skiffs like you're seeing here. They're well equipped. They have great equipment, 27-foot carbon push poles, great motors. We've occasionally, like any operation, a motor might break down or something at some point, but they've done a great job of keeping up their equipment. You're not jumping into an operation that isn't well funded, and they reinvest in their operation with good stuff. So I want you to feel rest assured that it's a quality operation everywhere you go. There are a few, I think this probably just take a minute to just talk a little bit about the different destinations. Hey, Steve, I can kind of summarize it and say if wading was a priority for somebody, I would err a little bit more towards the Zapata trip. If somebody felt like they were going to be a little bit more boat-based and maybe they've done a little, a fair bit of saltwater fishing and wanted to target larger tarpon, larger bonefish, but didn't mind staying in the boat a greater portion of the time, then the Canareros trip might be a better option. How would you weigh those out between the two of those?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's unique in that Zapata trip, some of the biggest flats in Cuba, I think for sure, are located on the inside of that lagoon in Zapata. So definitely, if wade fishing is a priority, that Zapata trip has an unlimited opportunity to do that. And the bonefish there, probably I would say on average, I mean, most of the bonefish that you hook in Zapata are going to take you to your backing. The average size is probably 2 to 4 pounds, I would say. We do see some bigger, 5+ pound fish there. We haven't seen many 10-pound fish there. That Canareos trip, definitely a little bit deeper water overall that you're fishing, especially on the island of the youth side. When you get to that area, you're fishing a little bit deeper water and going to be focusing on tarpon on that half of it. The permit and bonefish opportunities are more in the Cayo Largo area on that trip. And last year when we did that trip, there were 5, we had 12 guys total in the group. 5 of them caught the biggest bonefish they've ever caught. And those were probably 5 to 8 pound fish that those 5 guys caught. They've done a lot of fishing. That whole crew had done a lot of saltwater fishing. And we did see some big bonefish on that trip. So, but much more boat-based fishing on that trip. Even in Zapata, when we see permit, a lot of times they're in shallow enough water. If they're tailing in the shallows, we'll get out of the boat and walk even at the permit.
Yeah, and then one more thing to know, just trip logistically, the Zapata trip offers 3 days in a single skiff and a little bit smaller boat. So if you are traveling as a single angler without a fishing partner, and you don't mind fishing alone, the Zapata trip might get the nod. But the Canareros trip, I mean, to be able to see that much coastline in a week, I think that's a pretty outstanding opportunity to do. And then the Canareros
not
trip,
only that, Joe, but with that Canareros trip, you are experiencing too, when they get into what they call their peak season there, that Cayo Largo is one trip offering that they do as a standalone. And then the Island of the Youth is one trip that they do as a standalone. The Cayo Largo trip is land-based, where you're staying in a lodge on the beach and going out from the beach every day. The Island of the Youth is a live aboard. And that Island of the Youth trip is mainly tarpon focus. You're not going to see a lot of bonefish or permit when you're fishing Island of the Youth.
Yeah, and it sounds like it allows you to be a little bit reactive to the seasonality and conditions, because you have 120 miles that they could choose from. So based on what happened the week before, the guide should be pretty tuned in. Well, let me ramble through the species. So in Cuba, we're talking about the Grand Slam Species Plus, and I'm going to go through these pretty quick, but we've got bonefish here, wonderful weighting for bonefish and Zapata. That's a very typical bonefish. There are some 7-pound fish, probably even 8-pound fish, but I've not seen those myself. But there are some great bonefish. Good permit fishing. I was scrolling through, just grabbing a few random slides, and I remember catching a bonefish and a permit within about 15 minutes of each other in the exact same spot on this beautiful white sand beach, which I thought was really cool, worth sharing. And you're going to fish permit both out of the boat and on foot. In Zapata, primarily out of the boat in the Canareros because of the softer bottom, deeper water. That permit was caught about another 15 minutes after that last one was caught. Same spot. It really is a great permit fishery, and you should get opportunities, permit or permit. They're always tough, but it really is a great destination for permit. Other species, I was scrolling through there, and I remember my fishing partner Eric caught this mutton snapper, which they're an absolutely beautiful fish, and I guarantee you probably weren't thinking mutton snapper when you jumped on this webinar today. But there are a lot of things that you can catch if you're just up for throwing your fly at everything that moves on these flats. And mutton snapper, absolutely gorgeous fish. There's Cubera snapper, and there's all sorts of other fish. Naturally, there's tarpon. That's a tarpon from Canareros last year. It's definitely an above average tarpon for probably more typical in Canareros, above average for Zapata, certainly. And then this is more like the tarpon. I'm going to try to make that one, the way I hold it, look as big as the other one, but that one's about half the size. And you can see here that we're fishing in some of these mangrove lagoons. And I'm going to run through the different species, and then I've got a few cool video clips, and I want to refer you to these because I think they do a really good job of outlining some of the fisheries. And that's Steve there releasing a snook that he caught on foot on the beach, which which is not, Cuba is the only place I've caught snook on foot. It's so cool being able to walk the beaches. Steve, can you talk about that milky water and kind of describe that?
Yeah, I mean, that day, so that's on a point on that Zapata trip. You can see that's open water behind us. And that day, when you get the tide just right and it's making that milky water in there, we caught a ton of snook and a ton of tarpon in that zone that day. And at first we were kind of pulling around the outside, throwing back in towards the shore from, the guide said, we could just get out here and walk this and be throwing at these same fish, which we were all for that. And yeah, I mean, we caught probably a dozen snook that day in there, and I bet we jumped 20 tarpon between 5 and 12 pounds in there.
God, that sounds like so much fun, being on foot and connected tight like that.
Yep. And that was January. So yeah, I mean, you don't need to be there in April, May is what a lot of people will tell you the peak season down there is. These fish just don't get pressure down there. Yet our groups are the only ones that are fishing it. Cuba, the way the outfitters have Cuba, split up, if you even hear a boat motor during the day, it's probably someone in your group fishing, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so restricted. It's quite wild. And yeah, I can't speak to Canareros, but the Zapata, it really is a marine preserve. It's completely wild. It's not like Belize where you're seeing lots of boats and houses and there's a cabana on every little spit of sand. It's a wild trip. Yeah, very, very good. There's barracuda. Barracuda are outstanding there. Absolutely awesome. And I'm going to show you a few video clips, and we'll start with barracuda. And I'm just going to share a few little clips. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but these were all filmed in Cuba. And I thought it appropriate just to show you kind of what it looks like actually in Cuba, in Zapata, and what it looks like on these different species. And so I'll just show you a couple little clips from each one. But this is a popper that I'm fishing for Cuda right there. And if that doesn't get you stoked to go fish Cuda on poppers, I don't know what could possibly get you fired up to go do that. And so you can find all of these links. So I am going to, I'm going to show you all of these links, and I'll show you a clip from Cuba of each one of these. But there's a playlist on our YouTube channel, and I'll put it in the chat before we're done. But these were all filmed on site in Cuba. And I'll show you kind of what it looks like to be in the lagoons fishing tarpon. There's lots of little mangrove lagoons, small channels, little safe spaces for tarpon back there. It's a very average tarpon, 8 to 10 pounds is very typical. You're going to see a super jumbo model there. You can see it burnt that angler's. It gave him such a horrific line burn that he lost control of the line, and we chased it back into this channel for, gosh, about 10 or 15 minutes. And you'll have to watch the video to see what happened in the end. But you could see actually what it's like. And here's a bonefish video. This is walking for bonefish in Zapata. And then at the end of all of these videos, they're a complete instructional 101. And I may be biased, but I think they're pretty good. And there's a little bit of action so you can see what it looks like real time. But we actually get into technique and instruction, some very specific techniques about laying your fly down and how fast to strip it, what to do if they refuse the fly, etc. And there's even some snook action here where we got out and waited for snook. But I like this one because there are a few clips of actually being on the liveaboard. Don't always do a great job of showing the accommodations on the liveaboard and things. But you could see what it might be like hiking back into some of these channels, on lagoons and things at low tide. So yeah, there's some pretty good resources in there. A couple of other things I'll show you is I think I shared with you the hosted trip page, and I put that in the description. And I'm just going to touch really briefly on flies, but there's a fly list that we've put together. And no fly list is perfect, but I think this gives you a really good starting point to cover all of the different flies, from tarpon flies that you're going to need to barracuda flies, to the very popper that I was using in the video right there. Everything is right on this page. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat for the Zoom. I'll just drop it in right now because I think that's all the screen share that I want to do. But I'm going to give you that fly list as well. And then there was, I think, one other. I'm going to drop that playlist in there because the playlist doesn't just show you guys more about Cuba, but the instructional component of it is in there as well. And so you can watch throughout the video if you really want to do great and be prepared to make the most out of this investment. We want you to have the best possible trip. We want everybody that goes to experience all these great highs of barracuda eating poppers, finally getting that permit to eat the crab, getting that permit that you've been after, having great days walking for bonefish, jumping tarpon, catching a few snapper, ladyfish, jack crevalle, cubera snapper, all this great stuff. We want you to have the absolute best possible trip, and we're going to work to do it. So we've got these different videos, and then the other one that I'll flash over to real quick is on our blog. And if you're just seeing this for the first time, I'm really glad to be able to share this with you. But on our blog, if you come over here and click saltwater, all of those videos that I showed you, the 101 or the Barracuda 101, the Snook 101, and maybe you know nothing about fishing for barracuda would be an example. There's a whole blog article that accompanies this with flies and strategies It outlines the leader system, the wire that you need, how we build it, some hacks for changing leaders very quickly. This is good stuff that's really going to help you with your fishing. So I'm going to drop all of those saltwater articles in the chat right now. And then this is recorded. So if you need to come back to it, there is a recording that we'll post on the main seminar webpage so that you can come back and get access to this as well, and at least skim the chat and get those links if you need to. The last thing I'm going to drop in here just while we're talking, because if I don't do it now and I just start going to the Q&A, is our saltwater rendezvous. But this is something that you want to register for, get it on your schedule, make the most out of this big trip, whether it's to Cuba or some other destination with our hosts. I'm going to drop that one in there as well, but we want you to get to that rendezvous if you can make it, so that we can sit down side by side, shoulder to shoulder. We can talk knots. How fast do we strip for bonefish? How do we strip for barracuda? Some hacks for catching permit, how to be organized in the boat, all that kind of stuff, to just so that you can make good decisions and make best use of your time. So we want you to succeed. If anybody is ready to just get booked on this, we do have space available in most of the weeks. We have space in, and I'm going to read these off to you. We have space in the January 13th Canareros week, hosted by longtime guide at Red, Shan Sedgwick. Shan is traveling a ton. He's doing a great job hosting these trips. We have space on the Zapata in March, hosted by longtime guide Eric Dalzell, also a very seasoned saltwater angler. I have space April 20th in Zapata, April 20 to 27. And then we have space in the late May week with longtime Reds guide Curtis Frisbee. So we have space in all those weeks. You can email Joe at redsflyshop.com, Steve at redsflyshop.com with any particular question. John Kovich's email address is in the chat as well. So you can, for bookings, John nails down all the deposit money so that the bookings are airtight and we get organized, what day to be there, when to land, all that kind of stuff. But we're here to help. We really want to see you do extremely well on these trips to Cuba, because Steve and I, we've done a lot of saltwater fishing, and it's kind of the tops. We don't want to hype it up too much. Saltwater fishing is still saltwater fishing. There's not free lunch once you get there, meaning the fish aren't going to jump in the boat for you, but at times it feels pretty close. The fish are highly unpressured. If you do the right things, the chances are the fish are going to be extremely cooperative for you. So we think it's a great trip. And start, any Q&A, start putting it in there, put it in the chat. I want to get your questions answered. As long as we don't talk over one another, if you just want to unmute and verbalize questions, we can do it that way. It's a small enough group today that we can go ahead and do questions and answers that way. But before I get to that, I will share this with you in regards to Cuba. I first booked my first Cuba trip in 2018 when I met kind of our booking agent or our operator by the name of Christian Rodriguez. And I met him in Bellevue at the fly fishing show when it was in Bellevue, or it might have been in Linwood that year. I can't remember. But anyway, I got to talk to him face to face, voice to voice. And I was like, man, this guy is into fishing. And I've got a meter that's highly sensitive for outfitter BS. And I was like, man, this guy's legit. He knows fishing. He knows logistics. He knows people. He's not putting me on. So I booked my Cuba trip just right then. I said, hey, give me a week. I'll take a group down there. And I went on the Zapata trip, and I came back and I told Steve about it. I was like, man, Steve, I'm trying to be realistic here. But I said, if the fishing was half as good, I'd still book again tomorrow. Like fishing could have been half, but just the logistics and the efficiency and how well it ran, the quality of the food, the quality of the guides, everything was great. And Steve is a little bit skeptical that it was meeting the hype that I had put it up to. he went and then immediately came back. And I think we booked like 7 weeks over the course of the next several years, because Steve was like, man, this place is going to get booked up. And it is. It's very hard to get into now, unless you speak up as an outfitter and reserve the whole boat. So anyway, that's just, I thought that was worth sharing, that Steve went, came back, booked a whole bunch more weeks. Okay, we got a question in here. Larry W says, can I arrange as a single for Canareros, or do I need a partner? Larry, you can book a single for Canareros and we will hook you up with a bunkmate and a fishing partner. That is one of the great things about the Reds hosted trips, is we will mix you up. And then what we'll do is we'll put you into a pool of single anglers, and we will just kind of rotate the single anglers as dance partners as it makes sense throughout the week. So that's a very good question, but yep, you can get booked in there, no problem.
And not only that, Joe, I'd say to add to that response on the Zapata trip in particular. So like Joe mentioned, you've got 6 days of guided fishing on that trip, and there's 8 anglers total with, excuse me, with lodging accommodations. 4 of the anglers have a room to themselves, and 4 of the anglers will be double occupancy in a room. 3 of those days on Zapata, you're actually fishing just you and the guide in the boat. So 4 guides every day go out solo, and then 2 guides take a double boat each day. And the double boats are actually a console boat. The single boats are tiller steer. So what a lot of guys will do is the days that they're in the double boats, those boats are a little bit more of a V hull. And those are the boats that they'll want to cross the open water in more readily. And so you might say those days you want to go focus on tarpon. The single angler days there, when you're in the single boat, you're going to want to take advantage of that permit tide probably, which the best permit fishing is typically an hour before high tide until an hour after. So if that's happening in the morning, you're going to probably tell your guide, let's go try and find a permit in the morning. And then the guides may want to book, go wade for bonefish or look for snook, waiting for snook or whatever in the afternoon. You can certainly do that, and it's easy to accommodate. So that Zapata trip for a single angler is a really nice trip to do, because odds are if you book as a single, you're going to have your own room. 3 of the days you're fishing solo anyways. It's still a very highly social trip, because at the end of each day and before leaving in the morning, you're sitting on the deck and having drinks and appetizers and talking about fishing stories. So very good program for that.
Yeah, and then the other thing that we hear, when folks book Zapata is, if they really do want to target permit, you're getting 100% of the shots. Not that you don't like seeing your fishing buddy take shots. They can mess them up or have success just as easy as I can, but if you're going to fish for permit and really focus on that, the Zapata, it's hard to beat when you're getting 100% of the shots on those permit days. And then the double boat days, yeah, like Steve said, you're fishing out of the boat, you can yuck it up with your fishing partner, get some good laughs, have some fun, but you're probably going to fish tarpon a fair bit out of the double boat on your 2 angler days.
Yeah, I would say, Joe, maybe go back to your map for 1 second too. And the thing that's very different about Cuba than a lot of other saltwater destinations that you're going to take, we've talked about these fish just being less pressured. I was on a boat probably 3 or 4 years ago one morning with a guy, and we spotted a big cuda laid up. And so the other guy in the boat, Mike, grabbed his cuda rod that had a popper on it. The guide was pulling in towards this cuda that was laid up. Mike took one cast and laid the popper down, and it was probably 10 feet away from where the fish was at. And I could tell he was thinking about recasting, getting closer, but he was like, I'll fish it. And he took one strip. That fish, came screaming forward, ate the popper, jumped once, and actually broke the popper off. Then I think that it may have eaten it deep enough that it ate it past his wire leader. And so, he hooked it, it jumped once, it broke off, it jumped again. The popper was still on the water. Then the popper came out, and the fish swam about 50 yards away and stopped. We pulled over to the same popper that he just lost and tied it back on, pulled back to that same fish again, and very first cast he hooked it again and we landed it. And that was probably like a 4-foot cuda. I mean, a big fish. And that's the difference. I mean, you know, the fish in Ascension Bay, a lot of times those cuda, by the time you even switch rods out, they're starting to swim away from the boat. They just are that much more sensitive there to pressure. And on this map that Joe is showing you right now, what this live aboard program does, there's no village that we're fishing around where there are fishing boats going out each day. I mean, that's a totally remote part of Cuba. There's a pot of boot there is, and you don't see villagers going out and fishing for sustenance, and you don't see other fishing boats. I mean, like I said earlier, if you even hear a motor during the day, it's probably someone in our group. So, you know, that's the biggest difference to fishing in Cuba versus some of these other destination trips. Belize, there's lots of traffic out there. Ascension Bay, there's lots of traffic out there, and some of it's fishing traffic, some of it's just, you know, villagers that are going out every morning and coming in every night. But yeah, Cuba is a pretty special place when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You know, one thing that we didn't talk about is just the time in Havana. I mean, we kind of brushed over that, but you're going to get to ride in old Chevys and old cars and classic taxis and see Central Park, buy Cuban cigars, drink Cuban rum. You're going to have a great
go have a daiquiri in Hemingway's.
Yeah, we totally brushed over all that. Like, that's like an incredibly enriching part of the experience. So all that's just like the whole package is it's a great life experience to be able to go do all that, couple it with this amazing fishing, and be able to experience Havana. You know, we get a full, you know, day and a night and a morning in Havana as part of the package that Steve and I like to plan. But you can certainly contact John at time of reservation to try to get a little trip extension. He's a Cuban travel expert, and he's best suited to make sure that we get that properly documented, and that you get a great place to stay and it's organized, because he can help with lodging and everything when it comes to those trip extensions. Let's hit a question. So Rob S., who is fresh back from Christmas Island, I think for the second time this year. Rob's a fishing fanatic. What rods do you take? He says, if you're in Cuba and 8, 9, 10, that combination's great. 8 for your bones and all your light fly work, your small shrimp, probably your snook, and 9 for your permit crabs, usually leaving a permit rod set up all the time. Maybe you're using the 9 for light tarpon in the mangroves. And then a 10 is really nice to be able to throw at larger tarpon if they're finding larger schools of tarpon out in open water, which we will sometimes. Steve's group has gotten into 80 to 100 pound tarpon. I have not personally experienced that, but it can happen at either destination. It's nice to have a 10 on board for those situations. If the guides are seeing those fish in the area, you want to have a 10 on board. And then 10's nice if you're going to pitch it at Barracuda. 10's really nice because Barracuda pretty hard on gear when they take off and accelerate. All floating lines, but if you have an intermediate sinking line for your 10, your 9 or your 10 for fishing tarpon in the offshore areas, you typically will pick up more fish just getting that flight 18 inches to 2 feet down with an intermediate line. But I wouldn't call it an essential or a necessity. But it's nice to have on a spool or another reel in the event the guides are consistently seeing those better sized tarpon running a little deeper. In intermediate line is good. Good question. There's iPhone sent in. How do you travel to liveaboards? We have prearranged group travel pretty much throughout. That's going to get you from the hotel to the liveaboards and then the liveaboard to the airport. Depending on arrival time, it's really easy to broker a taxi, and but depending on flight arrival time, your host is going to help coordinate all that travel. But we've accounted for all of those logistics. And then one little tip on taxis that, as I was kind of going through pre-trip stuff today, is always just a general travel tip. I thought was good nugget. Agree on the price it's going to cost you to get to the destination before you get in the taxi. I think that's a good piece of travel advice for you. As far as, and there are lots of details that the discussion can go on for hours, regarding, how much cash do I bring? What currency does it need to be? We travel with about $750 in euros, $700 in US dollars. You're not going to spend quite that much, but we will tip the guides out in part of that. And then because credit cards aren't going to work and your cell phone is likely not going to work in Cuba, we want to make sure that we have enough cash to operate, and you don't exchange your US dollars or euros for Cuban units of currency when you're there. Just utilize your euros and your US dollars. Okay. All right, any more questions? Okay, I'm going to put a couple of email addresses in the chat, okay? And that's going to be my email address and Steve's email address. And we are here to help if you have questions that you would like to ask privately or about specific dates or trip logistics. We'd love to help. We'd love to get you on one of these trips. We have space available, and yeah, they're fabulous trips. So if nobody has any more questions, let's just call this one. I will save the recording and I will post it back on the main page for all of our travel seminars. And next week, let me see what we're going to do next Wednesday. I don't have the schedule memorized, but I'll put it on that same page. Next week is going to be Campeche, Mexico. We're going to talk about Tarpon Town. It's going to be all about baby tarpon, fishing in Campeche. Steve, Dallas, Bobby, Tony, Shan, and I, we all did this trip together as one big group this spring. Loved it. We'd love to share that one with you next week. So, all right. So I'm going to end this, but I will post the recording back on that main page. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And like I said, email us private questions if you'd like. Thank you. Here we go.